Welcome to Compost 101 by Stephanie Susan Smith. I am a gardener, a member of the Garden Writers Association of America, and a gardening author. I hope you enjoy this presentation on Compost 101. What is compost? Compost is a rich humus made up of decayed plant and animal matter. Humus is, according to the Compact Oxford Dictionary, the organic component of soil. What's so great about compost? When you add compost to your garden, it improves the productivity of your soil, reduces the need for fertilizer, improves water retention of your soil, it improves the drainage of your soil, and it conserves water. Now, composting is the act of putting together plant and animal matter along with soil and water to produce compost. This is different than just piling manure in a pile and letting it age. You actually have to put together a compost pile in a certain way so that it will compost properly. Now, the advantages of composting is it saves spaces in landfills. You're not putting all the grass clippings and the manure and stuff in there. It saves you money. Compost is expensive. And you know what you put in and what you get out, so you know exactly what you're putting on your garden. Now, composting has a rich history. The earliest making of compost is traced to the Roman Marcus Cato over 2,000 years ago. It's almost certain that there was an earlier use because this was pretty refined by the time we find it in the Romans. The modern refinement of composting began in India by Sir Albert Howard, and there's research continuing today on how to most efficiently produce compost that will best work for your soil. What composting essentially is microorganism farming. Think of yourself as a microorganism farmer. These microorganisms take plant and animal debris and turn it into compost in much the same way a cow takes grass and turns it into beef. If you can optimize the living conditions for these microorganisms, you get better compost. Now, the raw materials for composting are any plant or animal matter. Some plant and animal matter is better for home piles. If you compost fats or meats, you will attract rodents and other animals to your pile. So we don't recommend those for home compost piles. We also recommend you do not compost diseased plant or animal matter. You don't want to spread the disease to the rest of your garden. Now, large items such as tree limbs will take a long time to compost unless they're chipped first. Anaerobic decomposition is one type of composting. It takes place without oxygen. Places like swamp mud are examples. And it smells really bad, and it can be done at home, but it smells and it's slow, and so it's just not your best way to do things. The best way to compost is aerobic decomposition. That takes place in the presence of oxygen. It's what most people associate with composting. And it can be hot enough inside the pile to reach 140 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. This will kill all of the diseases and sterilize the weed seeds. Now, what's necessary for composting? You need aeration or oxygen, which means turning the pile frequently. You need moisture. Even the microbes need a drink. You want to control your particle size. Chipped wood goes faster than the tree. Temperature, which in Texas, where I live, is not usually a problem. In places where it gets cold, it slows down in winter. You need the microorganisms, and you need small bugs and earthworms. Now, if you build a compost pile properly, these things will come, whether you want them there or not. The compost pile It helps to have a structure in which to pile the raw materials. One of the simplest is just take 3 pallets standing up and nail together with a 4th for a gate. You can have, so that you have 3 bins. You can be really fancy smancy and expensive and buy one of those tumbling compost bins or something like that, but you don't really need to. The function is to maintain the pile so that it will heat up during composting. The types of containers. You can just have a holding unit where it's piled up and it's not turned. You can have a turning unit where it's built for easy turning of the pile, like the 3 compost bins. You can have heaps, which tend to spread out and get messy. You can dig a pit and compost. You can even compost in a plastic bag if you have the room. The holding units for optimum compost size and compost pile heat, you want a 3 by 3 by 3 feet unit. It can be made of 1 fence post and 10 feet of chicken wire or welded wire fence. You put the post in the ground, you anchor the wire to the post, you make a circle of the wire and you anchor back to the post, and then you add material to compost. Problem with this unit is it's hard to turn. For turning piles, you want a 3 bin unit, which is optimal. You have raw material goes in the first bin. As it reaches midpoint in composting, you turn it into the middle bin. Then, as it gets ready to be finished, you turn it into the last bin to finish off. You can get plans for these turning units on Aggie Horticulture, and the address is on your screen. Now, heaps, where you just pile the material on the ground, you pile it 3 feet tall, and then when it gets that big, you start another pile. As I mentioned, the problem with heaps is they tend to become spread out and they don't stay together very well. Now, pit and plastic bag composting are not really recommended. This is that anaerobic composting, and it stinks. Plus, digging the pit is a lot of work, and accessing the compost when it's done is difficult. Plastic bags are easier, but they're unsightly and they're heavy to move. Now, what do you compost? You compost leaves, grass, manure from herbivores, that's cows, horses, stuff like that. We don't recommend manure from carnivores or omnivores like dogs or cats. You can compost kitchen scraps, shredded paper, chipped wood, healthy plants. When you pull your plants from your vegetable garden because they have finished their lifespan, you can throw them on the compost pile. Coffee grounds and used tea leaves. We don't recommend you use any kind of dog, cat, or human poop. Meat, oils such as butter or salad dressing, or tree limbs bigger than chips. The first few of those can spread pathogens that people can get. The meat and the oils will attract critters to your compost pile, which you don't really want. And then the tree limbs take too long to compost. To build the optimal compost pile, you want to start with a 6-inch layer of wood chips or other bulky material on the ground inside your container. Next, you add 6 inches of leaves, straw, hay, or some combination of these. Then you water the pile until it's wet, but it's not dripping. You sprinkle the pile with just a thin layer of cheap nitrogen fertilizer. Then you add 3 to 4 inches of kitchen scraps and grass clippings. And then you start over, and you add bulky stuff. And you do this until you run out of material or the pile is 3 feet high. Now, to maintain your compost pile, you want to turn it weekly into the next bin. You want to add enough water for the material to have the dampness of a wrung-out sponge. And if you're just making a heap, you can ignore it for a year or so, but that's how long it takes to make compost. whereas turned piles can make it in 3 to 4 weeks. Now, how do you tell when it's done? When the compost cools off and does not heat back up on turning, it's done. It should be dark brown, crumbled, and smell like good dirt. If you see clumps of manure or bits of identifiable plants, if there's a clump of anything bigger than your fingernail, it's not done yet and you need to keep going. Now, to use the compost, for a new bed, you should have 3 inches of compost tilled into the first 6 inches of topsoil. Every garden season, put 3 inches of compost on your garden and till it in. Now, one thing you need to be aware of is if you buy compost, make sure that it's done. Sometimes you'll get a bag of compost where it's still green. You can tell that there's manure in it, or you can tell what plants and stuff were added. You need to take that back because it will burn your plants if you put it down. Now, where can you find more help? There's a wealth of publications on aggiehorticulture.tamu.edu, and that's spelled aggie-horticulture.tamu.edu. You can go to my website at stephaniesusansmith.com, or you can buy my book, Preparing a Vegetable Garden from the Ground Up, by Stephanie Susan Smith. This is available from Amazon.com and other booksellers in either print or ebook form. I hope you've enjoyed Compost 101.